Hey guys, it's Dave, and today I was absolutely blown away by the news that Jared Isaacman is going to be NASA's next administrator. This is something that really I could never have predicted. He wasn't even on my radar as a possible pick, and I think as a lot of people's possible picks. And when I first saw a tweet mentioning it today, I actually thought it was a joke, and then I looked into it a little bit more and realized that no, yes, this is very real, and just couldn't believe it. So there is going to be a ton of implications for this when it comes to his relationship with Elon Musk and SpaceX, how he feels about RocketLab, the entire commercial space industry, and what potential ripples this could have. Let's talk about all that right now. Before we dive into that, though, if you haven't subscribed already, I hope you'll consider doing that by the end of this video. And for those who have already subscribed, it is very much appreciated. By the way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Jared's nomination as NASA administrator and what you think this would mean down below as well, and we'll continue the conversation there. Okay, let's dive into NASA's next administrator. Well, this is the confirmation we have that Jared Isaacman just recently posted to Twitter. He said, "I am honored to receive President Trump's nomination to serve as the next NASA administrator or administrator of NASA. Having been fortunate to see our amazing planet from space, I am passionate about America leading the most incredible adventure in human history." Going on talking about space and how he hasn't, he was born after the moon landings, as I was as well, and never seen landings live. A lot of inspirational stuff, and in general, I am a fan of Jared, so overall, I would say this news is probably good, but there are some issues we do need to discuss about it. First of all, Jared is obviously CEO of a pretty big payment processing company right now called Shift4. I know Scott is actually an investment in Shift4, so if you follow Scotto, who also covers RocketLab, I'm sure he'll be scrambling to figure out the implications of this. I would imagine that Jared cannot be both a full-time CEO at Shift4 as well as administrator of NASA. I would think administrator would be a full-time job, which would mean they would need another CEO running Shift4 while he's gone. At least that's what I would imagine. The other thing to keep in mind when you talk about Shift4 and Jared is that Shift4 is the payment processor for Starlink, so they have a very committed business relationship with SpaceX, and that will fall under a lot of scrutiny as a potential conflict of interest. Here you have SpaceX being one of his customers, giving him a big contract, and now he will be in charge of NASA, who will presumably be giving lots of big contracts back to SpaceX, and of course they'll be competing with other companies. Now, there are processes that usually go with these competitions, and there'll be committees that will judge each proposal based on the merits of their, technical proposals for whatever project, as well as the track record of companies and obviously cost as well. So usually there are processes in place that these decisions don't really go to the head of NASA himself, but you've got to believe he has some influence and talking with people behind closed doors. So big potential conflict of interest there. Obviously, he also has the Polaris program, been to space with SpaceX several times, has bought some more launches of their Dragon capsule. I'd have to imagine that's probably on hold, at least in terms of him going to space in another Dragon for the next 4 years while he's an administrator. But he's a guy who's incredibly passionate about space. He's obviously run a quite successful public company and believes in capitalism, and obviously I think he will do as much as he can to bring down costs for NASA's programs, as well as really lean extremely heavily into commercial space and finding commercial providers who can do things cheaper for NASA. I think this is a sign of potential massive changes for the administration. I'm sure there's a lot of people a little bit nervous. Interesting thing about Jared is he's not also a hardcore Republican, so this isn't a very partisan pick. either. He says he's a moderate and occasionally weighs in on various issues. He attracts criticism from both sides and talks about, it's possible to be a Republican who doesn't believe that everyone needs an automatic weapon and blah, blah, blah. And he talks about finding common ground, so doesn't really consider himself to be a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that is going to help in terms of unifying the agency. And frankly, I just kind of like to see it, to be honest with you. Hopefully he can bring people together as opposed to have more divisiveness. Now, I know I have a ton of RocketLab investors who follow me on this channel, so I'd be remiss if I don't talk about any potential impacts to RocketLab. Obviously, Jared with the very close ties to Elon Musk and SpaceX. So we just dug up some of his tweets and stuff that he's talked about and his opinions on things, and wanted to share a few of those things with you. He did say relatively recently that he would not want to be an investor in another launch vehicle provider when Starship comes online. But there are countless other problems to solve to making life multiplanetary and all that kind of stuff. So basically, the reason this got a lot of flack is anyone who's a fan of anyone not SpaceX didn't like this comment, saying whether you're a fan of Relativity, Stoke, or RocketLab. Obviously, I think we do need competition in the future, and we can't just have an industry that gets to Starship and then says, okay, we've made it, no more launch vehicles ever, and we just this is our new steady state. I don't think that's what we want. We want multiple companies continuing to compete, push each other to improve, and lower their prices as well. We don't want a monopoly in launch in the space industry. I think Jared, as a capitalist and CEO, would probably agree with that. It's just that Starship, he believes, is an extremely impressive vehicle. And yes, it is an extremely impressive vehicle. I would never deny that. When some RocketLab shareholders read this, they took it to mean that he was not a fan of RocketLab. However, that is actually not true. He posted recently congratulating Peter Beck on RocketLab's solid performance after a couple launches, and said that what you do is insanely hard and the pressures of public markets as well. Keep it up. The world needs lots of innovative companies like yours. Peter Beck did, I think, reply to this tweet or one other one saying, thank you. He likes what he does. And they'll save a seat for him one day whenever they do get a capsule up and running. So seems like Jared is actually a fan of what RocketLab does. And continuing on, he replied to a post talking about RocketLab, saying they have built successful products, diversified through M&A, delivered meaningful revenue growth, and assembled a balance sheet that can ride out a few tough years. I like RocketLab. So yeah, he's pretty clear that he does like the company, although he doesn't like the prospects of any launch vehicle other than Starship, and RocketLab working on Neutron. Well, yeah, that's a little tough. But overall, no reason to believe he's anti-RocketLab. If anything, he seems quite pro-RocketLab. Talking about some of the internal reactions that we're just hearing on Twitter. Now, obviously, this is just one account, so I don't know for sure how true it is. But this person is saying that the nomination has been met with many questions and backlash from the agency. The thing is, when you're a space fan, you're going to be critical of some stuff that's happened and overspending. I think we all have been at various times. I know I have been. But then when you get picked for a role like this, suddenly all those opinions are dredged up like we're doing right now and examined. And of course, they could be read in the wrong light. He was openly critical of Blue Origin winning a second lunar lander vehicle, bringing a competitor to the Starship program, and he's personally obviously very involved with Starship. The other thing I found extremely interesting is a while ago, back on November 12th, Eric Berger tweeted that he's hearing NASA's space launch system might be canceled entirely. This rocket has been incredibly expensive and under development at Boeing for a very long time. It is the launch vehicle that's due to send NASA astronauts back to lunar orbit and then down to the surface on Starship. So a very important part of NASA's Artemis program, but has been extremely bloated, over budget, taken way longer to deliver, and is generally not very well liked among the space fan community. So Eric says it's now 75 to 25 for cancellation. Generally, I think I am in favor of canceling the SLS. However, that would probably delay the time the next NASA astronaut lands on the moon. I don't think there's any way they hit the aggressive time periods that are set currently if they cancel SLS. Lots of work to do on Starship, but I do think canceling SLS is the right move in terms of the longevity of the program and making it sustainable and not prohibitively expensive to set up an actual permanent base on the moon and continuing onwards to Mars. So, yeah, I think it's getting more and more likely we might finally be witnessing the end of SLS. If you look up some of the spending figures on it, it's just been out of this world. Absolutely crazy. So I'll just share some quick thoughts here about Jared. I don't think he'll be bad for RocketLab. I do think he's a guy who has some integrity, and overall he will let the bidding process for future contracts play out as it should, and the lowest bid will win, or the best bid will win. He does like RocketLab overall and says we need more companies like them. I don't see him just, giving every single contract to SpaceX despite their close ties. If anything, it wouldn't surprise me if, just as a way of showing that he's, not, over influenced by Musk and SpaceX, he goes out of his way to give an early contract to someone who's not NASA to just kind of distance himself a little bit from them. He's extremely passionate about space and has a lot of the opinions that a lot of us share about bringing down prices and the benefits of the commercial model. So overall, pretty pleased with this pick. I think I was just so taken aback. He wasn't on the radar. I do wonder if he'll get a little bogged down in some of the politics that he's not as familiar with. I think he has to get a lot of stuff through Senate and Congress when it comes to canceling SLS, and you have a lot of these congressional people who want SLS to continue because it employs people in their state. Also, if NASA, you really do want to close some of their centers and streamline things, well, that's very tough because, once again, every single senator doesn't want the NASA facilities in their state closed, because that just means less jobs and it doesn't look good on them. It's a very difficult political situation for sure, and I'm sure every decision he makes regarding SpaceX will be incredibly closely examined. So overall, I would say this means an even sharper focus, as Peter Beck would say, on cost savings, on commercial launch and commercial space projects, which is probably good for RocketLab. I think they can excel in this environment. I think it's obviously going to be great for SpaceX having that really close relationship and someone who views them extremely favorably at the helm of NASA. I assume Jared has to step back from Shift 4 and probably his Polaris program temporarily while he is administrator. It seems more and more likely like that giant SLS program will get canceled. Maybe even Lunar Gateway is now on the chopping block, and we just have missions of Starship sending people directly to the surface of the moon without stopping in that near rectilinear halo orbit around the moon and building out a space station in lunar orbit. That one has always been a controversial decision, and also probably makes it more and more likely that NASA does fund some kind of Starship mission to Mars in the near future. I think Jared, thinks big and wants to send humans further than they've ever been before. And, I'd love to see that as well. So it looks to me like a real turning point for NASA. I think commercial space is here to stay. Companies like RocketLab and SpaceX should do very well. Hopefully Blue Origin and a lot of these other players as well. And I think, more old school companies will continue to struggle. You look at a Boeing, they've said that they will not bid on fixed price contracts because they've been burned and unable to execute on them. Like when it comes to Starliner, they've had to incur all sorts of costs for going over cost. They just can't come in on budget. So I think they will struggle even more in this environment. And the old school big space primes will continue to kind of give way to the new, lean, fast-moving commercial companies like RocketLab and SpaceX, and I am all for it. So what do you guys think? Were you surprised by this decision. Are you happy with the pick of Jared being NASA's next administrator? What do you think is going to happen with his relationship with SpaceX? Are there any issues there? How is this going to impact RocketLab or any other publicly traded space companies? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Any other implications I didn't bring up, I'd love to hear about. This news is so new. I just heard about it literally 45 minutes ago and just trying to process it, so I'm sure I'm missing some pretty big implications that I haven't even thought about, and I would love to hear your comments on that as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hope you have a great day and a great rest of the week. Bye for now.